baby. You listening to the Powell Movement.
Welcome to the Powell Movement. I'm your host, Mike Powell, and Happy New Year, and welcome to Season 5 of the podcast. If you asked me if I'd still be doing this 4 years ago when I started, I probably would have said no. I'd think I'd have a job again at this point. So I'm so glad I was wrong about that. And now I feel like I can keep this going for a long time, especially if you keep listening, because it's all about making content that I like. But if I'm being honest with myself, you have to like it too. And I'm hoping to spice it up a little bit this year. I'm going to record with a few co-hosts, and if that's entertaining, I'll use it. And if not, I'll just delete it and do my normal intros, which is just a bunch of diarrhea flowing from my mouth, usually about me. But this is the Powell Movement, so that is fitting. I will say that recently, I've been asked by a few people what my goals for this podcast really are. And to tell you the truth, the only goal I've ever really had for this thing was to fill my 6 sponsor slots. Then I would have a salary that's comparable to my last life, and that would be great. And while I do think this podcast can lead to bigger things, I still want to check off my first goal, filling up my sponsor slots for 2021. And I've done that through March. First and foremost, I have 10 Barrel. And they have supported me and action sports forever. And it's a fucking beer. And while I know some of you don't drink, for those of us that do, and when you used to drink, having a beer sponsor was just a dream. And when you have beer, you need something to put it in, which is why I have Stanley on board. And when I think of beer, it reminds me of beer goggles. And when I think of goggles, I think of my buddy Kurt and his company Glade Optics that you should check out. And when I'm wearing my Glades, I'm on my Elan skis, and Elan is supporting all ski episodes this season. And you can get your sweet Elan skis over at the best retailer out there, Peter Glenn Ski and Sports. And my final sponsor, well, this is one I've been working on since I was 18 years old. I'm happy to let you know that the most innovative app on the planet is now a sponsor of the Powell Movement. Weedmaps is on board, and that's a life goal for me. And speaking of weed, well, my guest this week's life has been shaped by it. Ross Rebagliati is a really talented, really confident Canadian who had a lot of things go his way, but he had even more things that didn't go his way. And along his journey, Ross didn't do that much to help or hurt his cause, which to me ends up being an issue in the long run for Ross. But who am I to judge? Ross is an Olympic gold medalist, and he and I had a great chat, and I'm not going to spoil it. I am going to ask you to follow me on Instagram at The Powell Movement. Email me with any questions, suggestions, or concerns at mike@thepowellmovement.com. And finally, please subscribe and review the show wherever you listen to it. That's it from me, and now it's time to talk to Olympic gold medalist Ross Rebagliati. The first topic of conversation I have for you is one that you get asked about a ton, and I would think for you it's probably super annoying because you hear about it all the time, and when you don't hear about it, if people see you or they hear your name, they're going to think about it right away. So I'm going to let the cat out of the bag from the get-go, and you are the first person to win an Olympic snowboarding gold medal in the history of the world. You are the king of counterculture sports and lifestyle, a cool guy amongst cool guys in a sport that considers itself inherently cool. How the hell did you end up going back to the dark side and becoming a skier again?
That's classic. I guess the short answer is that I always was a skier, and it was one of those things that I had in my arsenal. And, I was really passionate about snowboarding and continue to be, as a matter of fact. And it was something that took over my life and made me want to pursue it over skiing as far as I could. When I retired from ski racing, I was already 15 and well into ski racing is like hockey, right? Like by 15, there's prospects, there's chances of going to the national team. And I gave that all up in 1987 and started snowboarding before we were allowed to snowboard, before any resorts in Canada allowed snowboarding.
Well, you did what a ton of kids did that were born in your age group, where you were forced into skiing because that was your only choice. You happened to be a great ski racer who had a pedigree that was going to go on to become something really great. We'll talk about that. But then you found snowboarding like every other kid back then. You probably saw it in Thrasher a little bit, and we'll talk about how you got into snowboarding. but snowboarding becomes the coolest thing in the world. You're a part of it. You become the biggest thing in snowboarding. And most people in that situation define themselves as a snowboarder. And you would never really see them going back on skis again unless it was a split board that was helping them get up the mountain in the backcountry, and then they were making it a snowboard again to go snowboarding. But for you, when did you switch from snowboarding back to skiing? Because it just seems like you don't hear too many people, especially people who have reached the top of snowboarding, go back to the ski realm. I mean, I can't think of many at all.
Okay, well, I'll remind everybody because, snowboarding has some history to it. And Sean Palmer, who's one of the most badass skiers there is.
We'll give you that, yes.
Okay. So, Sean was really like the first guy to do that, where he was at the top of his game, when he started doing photo shoots on skis.
But he kind of came back just to show people that he was better than them. He was like, hey, I'm going to enter your contest and I'm going to kick all your asses and then I'm going to go snowboard when I'm not skiing, it seemed like. But you became a skier again, like you enjoyed skiing.
Exactly. So he competed in skier cross and, was successful. And I think he succumbed to some injuries or whatnot. But yeah, and I guess that was about going on 7-8 years ago now, where powder skis really started to catch my attention. It got to the point where they were even wider than my powder board. You measured both of the skis and you added, the surface area. And the way they work in powder as a skier, you can't imagine how they work in powder as a snowboarder. So I was looking through the eyes of a snowboarder while I was trying out these new powder skis. And I was all off axis all day long, just like, this is so different, but so similar at the same time. And, of course, I was riding in Whistler and a lot of steep runs where you're literally, in a controlled free fall, just pounding off of stuff like crazy. And all of a sudden, it just became like the culmination of years of being on snow 200 plus days a year, training and snowboarding. And it just got to the point where it rubbed off on my skiing to where it felt like I had never stopped skiing in almost 20 years, right? And so it became a kind of invigoration to me, like a challenge almost, or something different, something new, like I know what it feels like to snowboard in chest deep powder.
Yeah.
Okay, I know what it feels like to be under the snow, wishing I had a snorkel the way they ride in Red Mountain and in Whitewater there. I know what it's like to snowboard in Alaska and to jump out of a helicopter because the top of the mountain's so skinny. I've been there. And to me, the challenge was the whole skiing and how I gave it up and I put it aside and I didn't give it a second thought. And then all of a sudden, it started catching my attention more and more. I mean, at first it was shaped skis and I wasn't really interested in shaped skis and the carving because my snowboards, they carved like unreal. Tape skis weren't really grabbing my attention. But then all of a sudden when the free ride shapes started coming in skis and the twin tips and these guys like Thovex and some of these other guys that, are just pushing the limits on free riding and big mountain riding, whether it's skiing or snowboarding. I mean, I guess I was looking for something and skiing was in my back pocket and it's hard to describe. I mean, like, you have a truck and a car and a motorcycle and, that's what I have. And I love riding my motorcycle and, I've been to superbike school and I've raced enduro, and I want to do the Paris, I guess it's called the Dakar now and the Baja. I'm interested in that. I'm interested in racing cars and I was top of my game in snowboarding and I can ski, right? So I also skateboard sometimes and I have a road bike, but I also like mountain biking. So to me, like I started wakeboarding before you could buy a wakeboard. We were putting foot straps, on a knee board and gluing water ski fins to the bottom of it before you could buy a wakeboard, in the early 80s. So I don't really have these like walls built up around sports that define myself. Like I'm a badass surfer and I'm also used to live in Hood River, Oregon because I was a badass, windsurfer. And then all of a sudden kite sailing and I started kiting like 15 years ago, right? So, I don't have that hang up over sport.
It just sounds like you've done everything and you're a badass at everything and you don't lack confidence at all. Were there any team sports in your life at all or was it all the individual sports?
I did some soccer, I guess, when I was in grade school. But yeah, I'm not much of a team sports guy. I didn't grow up playing hockey. I grew up ski racing, and I grew up skateboarding, and BMX were the things that I did growing up. For me, it was a lifestyle.
Like you had a ramp at your house, right? Like a real vert ramp in your backyard?
Yeah, we had ramps, like half pipes, and as I got older, the ramps got bigger, and we were mostly on like street skaters, in Vancouver, not so much, the ramp, although we did build ramps. And I'm a carpenter by trade nowadays, and I guess that stems from building skateboard ramps probably. But yeah, we were pretty into all of the different things that we did. And at first we thought it was the board sports like skateboarding, surfing, snowboarding that was kind of windsurfing, sort of like the cultural thing. And then skiing wasn't really part of that culture in those days. But now, it's the same kids skiing that are snowboarding these days, and vice versa. And the culture is very similar, whereas back in the day it wasn't. And that's why there was such a contrast and a pushback. I mean, it was almost for sure a generational thing when we started.
When I think about like the difference between skiers or snowboarders, or I think about Canadians in general, Canadians are very nice people. But if you were to go to a skate park in Canada and you bring rollerblades and there's skateboarders there, there's going to be a Surrey-type mentality from all the skateboarders, and there's going to be a fight between the rollerbladers and the skateboarders. And I've seen it like 10 times at skate parks in Canada, which is the only reason I bring it up. But I'm sure back in the day, there was probably that between skiers and snowboarders too, just like that weird mentality. Did you see that up there too?
There's that. And I'm probably, like you say, an anomaly when it comes to that sort of thing. It's just that, I'll be 50 this summer. I lived these sports for my whole life already. I was a ski racer, and I competed in World Cup and snowboard halfpipe and at the US Open. And at the time, it was counterculture for me to quit freestyle and to just ride alpine. That was the talk at the time. Like Terry A. Hackinson, I was the guy he was worried about on the World Cup the year I went on to racing. I had no sponsors. I lost all my sponsors over it. But at the time I was just more interested in a clean win as far as no judging and just racing against the clock. Like at that time, we had big names in the game, starting off with people like Craig Kelly and Sean Palmer and Terry Hawkinson, Jeff Brushy, all the big names of the day. And judging was very, there was a lot of conspiracy theories on the big names getting the best points. And I just wanted to race, and I didn't want to be part of the, that sort of crazy culture on tour and the whole freestyle, like the Mike Ranquick guys. And I love those guys and everything. But coming from the background, like ski racing background, I was looking for an opportunity to be an athlete and to kind of fulfill that side of things. And snowboarding really included racing and freestyle for many years. But then by the early 90s, I had to really choose. I went to the alpine snowboarding, and it's the same thing. I got flack for it too, for doing that back in those days. And, to be honest, this is kind of the first interview calling me out for skiing again.
I mean, it's just a question, because it really, you said Sean Palmer, but the reason in thinking about it, Sean Palmer did it just to tell everybody that he's better than them. And then he did it in biking as well, just because he's a fucking crazy talented athlete who can do that. And he wants to show people, I don't know if it's his ego or what, but he's the guy that's going to tell USA Today he's the best athlete in the history of the world, and they're going to print that. But with you, it's different. It's like you went back to skiing because the gear got to the point where you had done everything in snowboarding and you love skiing now, and you had made a choice. But you've made a bunch of choices in your life, and I guess the first one is you're being groomed to be an alpine ski racer, and you're a good one. Like you spend your weeks in school. I think you go to like Lord Byron Secondary School, which is like an art and sports school. And I don't know if you go there for art and sports, but you do that during the week. And then on the weekends, you're on the podium at every ski race. And your parents have like everything invested in you and your ski racing, it seems like. Is it that's what the family lives to do, is to see you race on the weekends?
Yeah, I got grounded and spent some time at my girlfriend's house when I let my dad know I wasn't going to be ski racing anymore. So yeah, there was the family fallout a little bit over it, actually, because like you say, there was a lot of time and money invested into me being a ski racer, and it's a privileged sport.
And you were good, right? You had promised, like your parents thought maybe one day that you could be an Olympian. I mean, they just didn't think on snowboards. They thought on skis.
I mean, they definitely saw my enthusiasm and my willingness to train in shitty conditions and to go every time and all the time. So they probably were just going to let me go as far as I wanted to go. So that was great, to have that support. And I guess the difference became partially money driven, because by the end of that year of me starting snowboarding, I had offers from multiple companies to snowboard companies at the time to ride for them as a sponsored athlete, where I had been ski racing for years and we never had any interest whatsoever from ski companies in what we were doing. I was a camper in Craig Kelly's very first summer camp up at the Blackcomb Horseman Glacier on Blackcomb. That was probably, the summer of like 88 or 89. And by the end of that summer, Tim Windell offered me a sponsorship from Sims, and there was one on the table from Kemper and K2, and they were just looking to sponsor anyone that knew how to snowboard at the time. It wasn't like hugely talented, but I guess they saw some potential. And Craig Kelly, obviously, who was the leader of the team, and it was his snowboard camps, offered me an opportunity with Burton Snowboards that I'd followed through with. And, by the next fall, so that was July, and then by September, October, I had probably 20 snowboards in my basement.
Oh, damn.
All different kinds of freestyle boards, prototypes. At the time, Craig was working on the Mystery Air, which was his transition from Sims to Burton. I had all the racing equipment, like the Safari Comp 1, 2, and 3, and speed suits and stuff that you only saw in the magazines. I was also an athlete that was competing in both the race and the half pipe, so that was good for those companies at the time, because racing and freestyle were sort of amalgamated and part of the same scene. And a lot of guys used the same board and equipment for both events back in those days.
Were you on a plate setup, though, when you're racing and then switching it up for the half pipe?
Yeah. Well, over time, it became specialized as we see it, how it is today.
Sure.
But in the 80s, like Craig Kelly would win races on his freestyle board and then compete on the same board in the half pipe and win the half pipe. For many years, there was a lot of hybrid, like soft hard boots that were kind of making the transition. And nowadays, in alpine racing, it's all hard boots and plate bindings and race boards, and freestyle is freestyle and racing is racing.
But back then, a lot of people raced. Bomber Bindings was like a brand that could sponsor people and had a lot of money coming in. Today, people haven't even heard of them unless they're in that tiny, tiny niche.
Yeah, that's the North American market, though. I mean, you get to Europe and alpine is alive and well. You can compare ski racing and snowboard racing to what hockey is to Canada, for Europeans. Over here, though, you're right. Alpine snowboarding is more and more in the background. And I think that just shows the progression of the sport from competing in both events on the same board to it becoming more specialized. It's going towards, what is driven, and it's money-driven markets and sales that are responsible for. If the X Games had a downhill race or something like that, then it would bring it back into the fold. If they had a downhill race where you needed a board that was 190 centimeters and you needed to wear ski boots because you're going to be going like 100 miles an hour, all of a sudden alpine snowboarding is back in the limelight. But until that happens, they're going to have the slope style events and the free ride events and the half pipe, and that's all great. It's awesome. But it is what it is. And it's just, I guess, part of the progression. And I think, unfortunately, it's money driven.
Okay. So I guess where we kind of got lost there was Craig Kelly takes an interest in you. He gets you sponsored by Burton or helps. A lot of people are interested, but you end up going with Burton. They are like the most influential brand on the planet at that point. It's arguable that they still are today. And that's how sponsorship starts for you. And does that mean free boards, photo shoots, and a little bit of travel?
Yeah, they covered my travel expenses. I was just driving within British Columbia to these events as an amateur. And yeah, they covered my expenses and all of the boards. And I was able to even sell boards to cover my expenses as well. So it worked out. When my dad saw that level of support, that's when he sort of changed his tune. So it was a matter of months from me starting snowboarding to having that level of support over the ski industry that didn't give a rat's ass about what I was doing. And so that in itself was inspirational, not only to myself, but to my parents, who were inevitably going to foot the bill and let me take the family car to these contests. And, over time, the support grew more and more, where my dad covered a certain amount of expenses on my World Cup season starting out, when I was 19 or 20 when I first started. It was an expensive undertaking.
For sure. And I mean, you timed this thing perfectly. Like when you were born, it all worked with the wave of snowboarding and having the ski race background before, which teaches you so much just about the snow and how to work a race course. And everything, it's timed so well. So by the time you graduate high school and you're a sponsored athlete already, you move up to Whistler, you're there for like the first day that people are able to ride a chairlift on Blackcomb. Like you were there on day one, like within the first 10 chairs. And how many other snowboarders are there when that happens? Like how exciting is that?
Yeah, there was no other snowboarders there, actually. And it was during the week as well, which was the reason for it. My dad brought us up there, and this was before sponsorship and everything. But yeah, my dad brought us up there, and I guess that would have been that first season. But anyways, that was the commitment. And yeah, we had some tough times, my dad and I, and everything over the years and stuff like that. But the level of support and commitment to a not sure sort of lifestyle like that ski, like introducing me to a potential way of life that he really wasn't part of. He was a geologist and continues to be to this day. But yeah, it showed that level of support. It gave me that confidence that I only had to worry about whether or not I was good enough to do what I was trying to do. And I set pretty high benchmarks for myself. Like my first year pro, I told myself that if I couldn't win an event in my first season, that I was going to go to university and forget about it. And the same thing before I turned pro. I was like, I'm not turning pro until I win the amateur championships in the States and in Canada. And then I did it on the same weekend.
That's crazy.
Practically 1 week in Oregon and the next week in Lake Louise. And so it was nice to not have to worry about, I'm going against my parents' wishes and that whole thing.
Now it's time for me to take a sponsor break. And my first sponsor is the 10 Barrel Brewery out of Bend, Oregon. If you haven't noticed, 10 Barrel supports so much in the world of ski, snowboard, and bike. But another cool thing about 10 Barrel is that they also do so much out-of-the-box fun shit, like giving away old Army vehicles filled with beer and so much more. I could go on and on about the antics, the Pray for Snow Winter Ale, and the Profuse Juice Hazy IPA that I've been drinking a ton of, or how they give back to protect our winners and support so many important athletes and causes, but I don't have enough time. To find out more, head on over to 10barrel.com and you'll get all that info, and next time you're at the store, pick up a 6-pack of 10 Barrel. My next sponsor is Glade Optics. Headquartered in Colorado, they are the independent choice for goggles. Did you know that 9 out of 10 of the top brands in the goggle category are owned by parent companies? They are out to take your money and give it back to shareholders. Not Glade. Their goggles have the fit, function, and lens of a $300 corporate goggle without the big price tag. To me, they check the most important boxes. They look really good, and I tried them on a few different helmets, and they don't fog. From photochromatic lenses to magnetic interchange systems to storm lenses, it's definitely worth checking out Glade. It all comes at pricing that you aren't going to believe, and I'm going to get you 10% off that pricing. What you need to do is head on over to shopglade.com, pick out some goggles, and enter the code TPM10, that's all one word, all caps, and the number 10 to get that deal. My final sponsor in this break is Stanley, and they pretty much invented the category of containers that keep things hot and cold. And there is no other product on the market that comes close to doing this as well as what Stanley does. If you've owned a Stanley, you still have it and know exactly what I'm talking about. And this year, if you're a skier or a snowboarder and you're going to do the mountain right, you're going to have soups, coffee, hot chocolate, and you're going to keep that all in the car. And most likely, you don't have all the containers you're going to need to keep that stuff hot or cold. The good thing is, I'm going to make it easier than ever for you to save 30% when you're buying the amazing products from Stanley. And all you need to do is to head on over to stanley-pmi.com, go shopping, enter the code DRINKFAST, that's all one word, all lowercase at checkout, and you'll get the deal and save 30%. Those are my sponsors. Now it's time to jump back into the podcast. Do you get to do the dirtbag snowboarder type thing as well? Like, are you dish dogging it at Sushi Village, riding a shit ton, smoking a bunch of weed, maybe some mushrooms here and there? Or is it full on serious training for you in the beginning because you are going to make these dreams happen? Or do you live like the snowboarder should live, especially back then?
Definitely it was both. I mean, I wasn't as big a drinker. Like, I like to party, like mushrooms and stuff like that. But I wasn't ever into like going out to the clubs and drinking. In the early days, you'd find me there occasionally just out of peer pressure and being forced to come out.
But you want to be fresh in the morning?
Yeah, and then feeling shitty. But I was more into staying up all night long with friends and party in the cabin and not even go to sleep and then go snowboarding the next day and just free ride powder for the whole entire day on no sleep. Those were the party days. I wasn't missing powder days because I was hungover or anything like that. And then as time went by and my competitions became more serious, then there was also less time for that. And the interest wasn't there. What I was doing was so awesome to me that it was a trip in itself, just being in Europe and being on the World Cup tour and doing the things that Craig Kelly was doing and people who I looked up to. Like my first year on the World Cup tour, I raced against Peter Bauer and Jean Nerva. And I even raced head-to-head with Terje Haakensen before he stopped racing. And he was one of the best alpine guys out there. And he stopped racing for freestyle kind of the same year I stopped freestyle for racing.
So you guys did the opposite thing of each other.
Yeah, and we were both coming out of our respective countries at the top of our game, riding for Burton, right, at the time. And Terje was sort of like Craig Kelly's protege. And I knew Terje, he came to the camps. And like I had mentioned, I was the camper in Craig's first camp. Well, I was a coach the next year and eventually a head coach of that camp several years later. And Terje was part of that camp as well. And a lot of other top riders like Jeff Brushy and Keith Wallace and Jason Ford and all kind of like big names back in those days.
Yeah, it's funny because you're with all those dudes, especially back in those days, but you're known for racing in the Olympics, which is a totally separate realm from what those dudes are part of. So you're not always talked about in those realms, but you're totally there. I mean, I look at the most core thing that you did in your career was probably 1992 when you won the Baker Banked Slalom. And to put that in perspective, like Craig won it in 91, you won it in 92, Craig wins it in 93. That's some crazy shit right there. And while the Olympics are a huge mark on your career, that banked slalom's what makes you a legend to like the core of snowboarding in the world, I would think.
Did you see who was second the year I won?
No, who was second the year you won?
Craig Kelly. And it was 300ths of a second or 200ths of a second.
That's crazy.
So I had just come off of the World Cup tour in Europe on my first year. Like I said before, I set a goal to win a pro race in my first year or else I'm not doing it. And I had just come off a rough tour in Europe on my first World Cup races, not placing at all. And I was pretty down when I arrived back home. I was there for 2 months training and then did 2 races. I was like 80th in the men's giant slalom. And I was used to cleaning up at races and in the freestyle. So that was hard. And I got back, my mom said, I entered you in the Mt Baker Banked Slalom in the pro category and it's next weekend because there was no internet. I was doing my thing in Europe. I was so disconnected, right? And so my mom was on top of it.
That's amazing.
Yeah, and she knows that the Mt Baker Banked Slalom is something I would have wanted to do. And anyways, I was wearing a speed suit. I had plate bindings, hard boots. I had my race board. I just finished training for 2 months in Europe with all the best guys. And Craig Kelly had his Craig Kelly freestyle board and he was wearing his jacket and his pants and I was all aerodynamic. And anyway, it is what it is. And, it was epic for me because Craig was my absolute hero. We were also good friends because I coached his camp for years and got me on Burton in the first place. I think Burton would have rather Craig won.
Right.
But in any case, it just kind of gave me the opportunity and the confidence to move forward with my career.
Because you get that win so you don't go to university and you're like, all right, I'm going back to Europe and for the next decade, I'm going to start kicking ass over there.
Yeah, basically. And then I basically lived in Europe for the next 6 or 7 years on the World Cup tour right up until Nagano.
And this is around the time, too, where I think a big change in your career is you're with Burton for a long time, and Burton is the race company compared to some of the West Coast brands when you're starting. But as time goes on, they're not the full-on race company that they once were when you started with them. And if you're a guy who uses plate bindings, you know all about F2, and they are the brand making specialized product that's looked at as some of the best in the world. And they're going to give you a ton more support than Burton is going to. And is that why you leave Burton, just for the support and product that you're going to get out of F2?
No, well, you're right about the support from F2 and the fact that I was in Europe and that Burton wanted me in North America. And they also wanted me in freestyle because they were making more money. They were selling more freestyle boards.
They wanted you to do the cool shit that Americans were doing because that's where the bulk of their business was at that point?
Yeah, right. And that was kind of also played into the reason why I stopped freestyle, was because the whole thing is so contrived. Like, as an athlete, I just want to win the race if I'm going to win the race. I don't want there to be a subjectiveness, like, who's my clothing sponsor? Who's my eyewear? I don't want that to come into play when I'm putting my whole life on the line instead of going to school and making a professional decision here. I'm following my dream, but at the same time, I got to realize as a Canadian, first of all, there's no money in sport. I have to play this the best I can. And to me, you know, I had a passion for racing anyway and knew I was good at it because I was winning races and freestyle competitions. And it was just a choice I had to make in my career. So Burton at the time didn't want me to go to Europe, and they wanted me in freestyle. And so I was going racing, even though I competed in freestyle for one whole year on the World Cup Tour in halfpipe. The next year I stopped. And by then, Burton dropped me because I wasn't in North America and I didn't have any sponsors. And some of the best riders in my mind were these F2 guys. And sure, they were talented riders, but by looking at their board, I just felt like their boards were really good. So I was friends with Kevin Delaney, who was a big pro rider in those days, who was riding for F2, and he introduced me to Tom and Jerry at F2 in Europe because Kevin was also on my race team. So we went from there, and it turned out to be a great relationship, and the support that I got technically and financially made it possible for me to really excel and match the level of riding that I was at to a piece of equipment that was able to handle where I was trying to go with my equipment. And so they gave me full reign, and they would build me 10 to 20 boards every summer, all different stiffnesses and different radius side cut, until we finally pinpointed the whole thing after like probably 3 years of doing that. So we phenotyped my snowboards into a design that by the time I think 94, 95 season, you know, I came to the pinnacle of design with that board and was uber successful and won multiple races that year. It was the most successful year. But as somebody who has full reign, I didn't stop designing boards, and eventually that board made its way into the closet. And I went further into my career a number of more years. I went through knee surgery, and by the time I got back to the Olympics, I'd sort of been through the gamut and wasn't really happy with my boards. And at the time, F2 also had dropped me because they felt like they could sponsor 10 guys for how much they were paying me. And I said, you could, yes, but you won't have you won't get podiums. So sure enough, they dropped me, and I ended up on different boards. And then I ended up having an ACL injury playing soccer in the off season. And that set me back a little bit. And by the time Nagano came around, like, I don't know how much time you have for this, but
we got time. But even before, I want to know about with Nagano, when do you hear about it first? Because you have this injury, you get dropped. We've kind of talked about that, but there has to be a couple years before people are talking about the Olympics, and you have to be salivating like, holy shit, everything in my life is timed out perfectly, where I'm at the peak of my career, even though, you know, F2 might not think it, but I am, and the Olympics are coming, and I have a real shot to make this Olympic team. So in the world of snowboarding, the Terriers of the world, they're saying the Olympics are not good for snowboarding, that they're going to sell out the sport, that they're going to steal the soul of the sport. And you know what? The Olympics are the most corrupt thing like in the world. Like, given it's all pure for the athletes and you guys want gold medals and to do well. But it seems like all the fat dudes who are on the top of the pyramid, there's a lot of weird, crazy shit. It's like just as bad as soccer over there at the Olympics, it seems like. But Terry was right in saying the Olympics were going to corrupt snowboarding, but snowboarding did need to go to the Olympics. Where was your head at? Was it less like, yes, get me in there, I want a medal?
Yeah, that. And, we learned that we were going in 1994. So that was the first time as athletes, as snowboarders, that we had a 4-year outlook on a race. So we knew in 1994, we found out that we were going to compete as a full medal sport in the 1998 Winter Olympics in Nagano. And at the time in 1994, I think I was ranked number 1 on the International Snowboard Federation World Cup Tour. So for me, it was like, okay, I'm going to the Olympics in Nagano. It wasn't a question in my mind whatsoever. I was ranked number 1. So, my mindset was if I'm going to win or not if I'm going to make the team. So with that said, it was that spring I blew my knee out playing soccer in Bend, Oregon, training with, our team was hosting the Burton Pro team in Bend, Oregon. We were training together at Mount Hood and collaborating with the Burton Pro Alpine team. And I blew my ACL playing soccer with those guys. Spent the whole summer in rehab doing physio every day. And I didn't miss too much training. I missed my summer training, but I was back training in September. I couldn't walk, but I could train on my board. And again, I set a benchmark to make the podium at least one time that year. And I was able to make a 3rd place in Italy, I think. It was a tough time, for that to happen. Like I said, I was at the top of my game. And we just found out the Olympics were coming, and, it's my first major injury with rehab, full surgery in 1995 wasn't like, surgery today.
Yeah, it takes a good year to come back from that solid, like to even feel like yourself again, I would think.
Yeah, I did physio for 3 hours a day for about 4 months.
Okay.
Fully covered through the medical system and extra perks as an athlete and etc. Like I had surgery within 2 days of the injury, which that's not really normal. So anyway, lots of support there to get me back. But yeah, it was tough to come back. I had knee braces. I was charging down the hill with a not a sure feeling knee, for me, it was my back knee, my back leg, which takes a certain amount of stress, as the front knee does as well. In snowboarding, your knees kind of torque sideways.
Yep.
Whereas in ski racing, you can sort of keep a symmetrical flex most of the time anyways. Whereas in snowboarding, especially in snowboard racing, where you're holding a certain amount of G-force over a certain amount of time, I was clocked at almost 80 miles an hour. So you can imagine the forces that get transmitted through your knees. So yeah, it was tough. And then going through the whole sponsorship thing with different equipment, and I found it hard. By the time Olympic qualifications came in 97, I was without a team by this point as well. I had some issues with my coach who thought I was bringing weed to training camps. And, as it turns out, I was definitely bringing weed to the training camps and smoking weed as I did for years. I was paying this guy. This was a pro tour. The Olympics weren't part of it at the time. We were just 4 years out. And then there was this falling out with my coach, and other athletes on the team, first of all, introduced me to friggin' smoking weed and training. And, I'm not going to name any names, but we're bringing weed to training camps too, right? So I was kind of mad that my coach was taking issue on me about it when these older guys opened my eyes to the secret.
I feel like just even hearing you say all this, though, I was going to say later on about, the Olympics being a little bit of a curse for you, but even from the time you hear about the Olympics in 94, it becomes a curse for you almost. Like you hear about it, that's when sponsorship and injury happens for you, where you lose sponsorship, and F2's like, hey, we could pay 10 people for the price of you. And I'm sure your price is going up because of these Olympics that make you more valuable because you're the number 1 dude in the world. So it's like going in before you hear about the Olympics, you have everything in the world in your little space. You are the best in the world. The second you hear that these games are coming on, it's like you get hurt, you lose all your sponsors. Then you have to claw your way back to get back into the Olympics, which you do. You make the team, but going into it, no one thinks you're going to win a medal. I think you're like the 3rd best Canadian in people's minds. The medal's Mark Fawcett's to lose. And Do you hear that noise? Does it affect you or motivate you, or what does that do to you?
Well, we knew coming into it what was happening because, like I said, I was on the International Snowboard Federation, and the Fédération Internationale du Ski brought snowboarding to the Olympics in the end. And we had been fighting as a federation, and the riders were the members of the federation in snowboarding, the ISF, to bring snowboarding to the Olympics for over a decade. And when we heard that it was going to be accepted, we assumed they were going to approve our federation to bring snowboarding to the Olympics. So there was this political problem also at the time between the two tours. And what happened was the FIS, the Ski Federation, fired up their own World Cup tour, all expenses paid, coaches and everything, right up against our pro tour, which nothing was paid, everything was pro. And, we had to make over $100,000 a year just to cover our expenses. And at the time there was big money, right? Leading into the 90s, the economy there was more money than ever flying around at the time. And by the time 1998 rolled around, of course, the reason why snowboarding was allowed in was, money was getting more scarce and the Olympics needed that boost.
Yep.
But, where was I there? I kind of lost my train of thought.
We've got you in the Olympics. It's Mark Fawcett's medal to lose, and do you hear that noise?
So by the time I got to the Olympics, a lot of guys like Fawcett had already done the switch to the other tour to start building up their points so that they could qualify for the national Olympic team and qualify for the Olympics, where you needed a minimum amount of points to get in. So, of course, I was on the top of the points list in the ISF tour. Even though I had an injury, the points still stayed on. They don't drop off that quickly. So the top names can stay in the top bracket. And a lot of the top guys on the ISF tour did the same thing that I did because we were all being paid to race on that tour. That's where our money came from. And the sponsors didn't even want us to move over to the other tour until the very last minute. And so that's what happened is I moved on to the tour the year before the Olympics. And I won the first two races. Just to give you an idea, I never would win more than one race a year on the World Cup circuit. And right away, I'm winning two in a row on the Ski Federation. It kind of shows you like how the top 20 guys definitely were not on that tour by that point.
Gotcha.
It was the new tour. And so by the time I made it to the Olympics, my points just weren't up there enough to be ahead of everybody else because I didn't have 3 years already of the fake tour. We were fighting for the Snowboard Federation that had been supporting our families for years. And the sponsors that supported the tour and sponsored the tour, like major corporate, like car manufacturers, were supporting the Snowboard Federation tour. We were live TV in Europe for years. And they would let out all the schools and businesses would close and we'd have like ski runs packed. In North America, we'd come here. Only the U.S. Open was like that in Stratton.
Every event was the X Games over there almost.
It was crazy, right? It was crazy town. Parties were happening and it was awesome.
Well, it's built into the fabric of their culture. And while I would think it's probably bigger for ski racing, like snowboard racing still got that.
Well, it put the smaller mountains on the map because the big ski resorts had the World Cup on lockdown, right? So it gave an opportunity to the secondary ski resorts to host a World Cup event that was arguably as popular, as World Cup ski racing, especially to the younger kids, right? So we were a big deal as far as TV rights were concerned in Europe. And that's where our money, the contracts came from. So I knew that coming into Nagano, I wasn't going to be ranked top 3 in the world. And I didn't give a shit either. I could care less because I raced against Fawcett and JCJ Anderson for my whole career. And we were buds. I was definitely buds with those guys. JCJ and I have a little rivalry, but still kind of like friendly, most of the time.
You're going to have beers after the event.
Yeah, especially like you'll see the biggest rivalry is not so much against other guys on tour from other countries, but within teams. That's normal. And especially when our team was stacked. I mean, look who was on it. We had JCJ Anderson, who won the first run. Mark Fawcett, who was the favorite, and rightly so. He was one of the best, and you can't say enough about how good he is. And then, of course, I was there as well, and, I had won races as well, and was ranked in the top 3 in the world also. And we really could have stacked the podium. It was really a huge opportunity for the Canadian team. And, of course, JC had some issues on his second run, and Mark had some equipment problems.
Now it's time for me to take another sponsor break, and next up is Peter Glenn Ski and Sports. If you don't know Peter Glenn, well, they started in Vermont over 60 years ago when retail was king, and they've been the brand that has helped build skiing and snowboarding on the East Coast forever. They still have that retail element, but now everyone can shop at Peter Glenn because they also play against the big internet brands too. And guess what? They'll price match the big guys, offer free shipping on orders over $49, and have great deals on the best brands. To find out more, head on over to peterglenn.com. My last sponsor in this sponsor break is my first ever ski sponsor, Elan Skis. They make handcrafted skis in Slovenia's Julian Alps, and they have a serious history, like 75 years of history. Seriously, this is their 75th anniversary of making world-class skis with innovative technology that makes skiing better for everyone. And with Elan, it's all about experience, and they are as authentic as it gets. Whether you're heading out on a backcountry adventure with your bros, on a trip to the local hill with your family, or enjoying après with your friends, the experience is what matters. And with Elan, that experience is always good times. You can find out more about the Ripstick, which I'm currently skiing on and loving, Glen Plake, and everything else Elan over at elanskis.com. Those are my sponsors. Now it's time to jump back into the podcast. After your first run, you're in 8th place. And I think with these, it's like the times combined, which it is what it is. And when you go into your second run and you're in the lead, do they put you in the finish corral and you just sit there looking up at your fellow teammates and everyone else? And are you secretly rooting for them to do bad? Like maybe not crash or hurt themselves, but like when Mark has a binding issue, like that's not a bad thing for you?
It's racing. We race, maybe 40 events a year for 10 years. So 400 or 500 events. And there's always something happening in a race. And that's just racing. And you want to win fair and square. You don't want someone to wipe out. You want to win because you beat that guy fair and square. And I think most athletes are like that. I think the guys that want other people to do shitty are the same guys that take steroids, in my mind.
I mean, you're sitting there at the bottom of the race corral, and we're not going to think about anything bad that the Olympics can do to your life at this point. You're sitting there thinking, this could be the greatest moment of my entire life. All I need is Mark to miss a gate or Mark to do this or someone to do that. And it's mine. I mean, not that you're rooting for that, but when it happens, I would think every time someone makes a mistake, it's almost like a sigh of relief. Like, okay, I don't have to worry about this guy overtaking me. Not that you want them to do bad, but you still want to win, right?
Sure. And just to clarify, we did 2 runs and they added our time together. And Mark had his issue on his first run and wasn't in the second run.
Okay.
So I didn't have to worry about Mark in the second run. And by the way, he was leading. He had the fastest split right before he had his mishap. And so, like I said, we had a stacked team. But yeah, in the second run, Mark was out of the picture, unfortunately for Mark. And that's racing. And I don't think anybody, gave it another thought. It happens in racing. It's just part of it. And you have to take it. And it happens to somebody at every race.
It's happened to you before.
And I actually had similar issues at the top of the start gate at the U.S. Open. I believe it was the year I won the U.S. Open Super G, where my binding fell apart at the top of the course for some reason. And I happened to have a spare binding in my bag and just put it on and won the race. But yeah, it was what it was. And, JCJ had won the first run, so he came down very last. So by that point, I was in second place. Thomas Pruger had come down. He was in second in the end. And so he would have been in second by that point as well. But he was also within like 200ths of a second of me. So when he came in, my time didn't seem to change at all. It just didn't move. My name stayed at the top of the leaderboard. And then I had to look at the hundredths and the thousandths. But anyway, JC had some issues right away at the top of his run. And so after seeing that, for me, the pressure, was definitely off. I didn't turn away. Nobody leaves the finish line until JCJ's through the finish line because he's been known to work the magic out there on the course. But yeah, as we know, he made a few errors on that last run, on his second run, and that's how that went down. And it left me in first place. And To be perfectly honest, I was already pumped, by the time I had gotten to the second run about being at the Olympics, and I was on a pretty big high. And when I whittled my way into third place and made the medals, that's when I really felt like more relaxed that, okay, I'm going to walk away with a medal. After 4 years of dreaming about being, at the Olympics, after throwing that dream away as a ski racer. And not only that, but the opportunity to win the first one and really to make history wasn't lost on me or the other guys. So it was amazing to walk away and to see, third and then second and then to be left in first place, especially coming from behind, it was 0.4 of a second out, putting me in 8th place after the first run. So 0.4 of a second, and you can have the whole field within that amount of time. So I didn't really lose hope because I knew it wasn't outside the realm of possibilities. It put me in a mindset, almost like a kamikaze mindset. And fittingly enough, I was in Japan to be feeling that way because I really had nothing to protect the way JCJ had. He was coming into it, the winner of the first run. And you might feel like taking it easy or not risking 100% just to maintain your lead. And in my case, it was sort of more or less do or die.
Your ball's out. You got to make it.
And that was my style. And I ski that way, too, to this day, is basically no holds barred. I dropped from the start line to the finish line. Like, it was an out of control.
Loose and on the edge the whole time? Like, he's going to crash, he's going to crash, he's going to crash. He didn't crash. He made it. Whoa.
It was a crazy run.
And you win the gold. Yeah,
unreal.
And when that happens, are you just like swept away, taken into interviews, then straight to doping control? And then what are the next 6-7 hours of your life like? I'm sure you don't have any control over it. You're just being pushed in different directions.
Yeah, it was exactly like that. We did the doping control immediately in the finish line in the Army tent. We peed into the cup. And then from there, I got whisked away into a van with some guys from Nike and the Trans World Snowboard magazine writer guys, who I invited both of those two groups to come with me in the van down from Shikokogan to Nagano to get ready for the award ceremonies that were going to be later that evening. And it was a few hours drive. And I can't remember the name of the writer from Transworld. The nice guy did a nice piece with that interview in Transworld after that. And of course, all the Canadian media had me on. I was still wearing my speed suit.
Do you have any time to party or to have a beer with friends or anything like that? Or is it just get these interviews done, You'll be back at the hotel in 14 hours and you'll eat and drink and do whatever?
Yeah, it was more like you're part of a greater cause at that point. You're part of an Olympic gold medal experience. The entire Olympics existence is based on this exact moment. And being the very first event of the Nagano Olympics on the very first day, and being not an introductory event, but a new sport in the Olympics.
You know what a rock star feels like. People are probably trying to touch you and stuff.
Yeah, it was ridiculous. I was signing cars in Nagano, big, nice cars, brand new cars, right on the door. Crazy. I did the award ceremonies, and when we left the venue there, we had to cross the street into a hotel, and there was thousands in the street, just that short jaywalk across the road. There were thousands of people on each side of the red carpet that stretched out. And, Japanese people love snowboarding. Japan loves snowboarding and skiing like the way we do.
Yep.
They're crazy about it. And I was already more popular in Japan at the time already than I was here in North America and Canada, and arguably more popular in Japan than I even was anywhere in the world at the time coming into Nagano. I think the year before I got in third place in the homologation race on the same run. And I was already on covers of magazines for years in Japan. They love freestyle and they also love racing there. Alpine racing is alive and well in Japan. So it was ridiculous. And there was one guy reached out and grabbed my medal. It was hanging around my neck and literally tried to rip it off my neck.
Huh.
And, there was like screams in the crowd, and the security all of a sudden went around me, and I made it across the street. And that was just kind of like foreshadowing for the next like 72 hours of craziness. And so we made it back up to Shigakogan that night, and, all the snowboarders were all at the same hotel, and, of course, wanted to see my medal because none of us had been close to a gold medal or Olympic medal before. And so it was quite the event, just being back after that whirlwind.
I can imagine it being so amazing.
Yeah, incredible, right? And then snowboarding was such a popular sport already, and there was a whole part of my story that we've skipped over that's just amazing that we'll hear another time. And like, I'll just give you a foreshadowing. Like, literally 2 things happened before I made it to Nagano. One thing was I didn't do the last qualification race for Canada and went to Europe, and the airlines lost all my gear, my boots, my board, literally 10 days before the Olympics.
Oh.
So since I didn't do the qualification race and I left for Europe to race against the guys I was going to be competing at in Nagano in the last 2 World Cup races before the Olympics, so I felt like that was better use of my time and money. The airlines lost my gear, and I was given the news that they didn't choose me for the team because I didn't do the last race, the last qualification race, which I was supposed to get on the team based on my qualification races plus past results. I was in the top 3 in all my qualification races with JCJ and Mark, and the last one I skipped to do the last 2 World Cups in Europe.
And that kind of screwed you out of the team?
Yeah, and so I lost all my gear, and they didn't pick me for the team, and I had to write a letter of apology and beg them to let me on the team, but I still had no gear. And I was there for 2 races. The whole World Cup tour lent me gear. So I had like Italian speed suit. I had my F2 board from years ago. Like, one of the guys from France was sponsored by F2. He gave me one of his training boards. I had boots from an Italian coach. Happened to be the same race boots Mark Fawcett used, so I was interested about that. And I got 4th in that World Cup with all different gear. And then I got 3rd in the next one. The first one was in Grachen, Switzerland, right by the Matterhorn. And then the second one was in Lienz, Austria. And I got 3rd in that one right before the Olympics on all this gear and a board that I hadn't used since 1994. And I think we touched on that.
Yeah.
The ones that I was being custom made for me, and I put it in the closet. I literally grabbed it out of the closet after that race because I flew back to Whistler 2 days before I was supposed to go to Calgary for homologation or staging and getting our routes outfits and everything. And I pulled it out of the closet when I was in Whistler, and I took it up with the boots and the bindings that I borrowed and everything from that World Cup, and I put it on my winning F2 board. And it was like the best feeling I ever had ever. And the next day I flew to Calgary with that gear.
So you already know you're on the team at that point too?
I already got on the team while I was in Europe doing those last 2 races. So I got back on the team. I got equipment that I was all of a sudden back on the podium since my knee surgery. Literally 2 weeks before the Olympics, I was feeling the best I ever felt.
You had a ton of shit going on before the Olympics, and then it all works itself out finally, and you get to the Olympics and you get through your run, you win the gold medal. February 10th is the day that your world changes and you become a rock star and you understand what that feels like. You get back to the hotel. You're sitting with all your peers. Everybody's checking out your gold medal, probably over beers. And everybody's just blown away like, whoa, there's a snowboard gold medal. This is crazy. And then on February 11th, everything in your life changes again. And how do you first hear about your situation?
So it was February 8th in Japan. So I have it at February 8th was race day for me in Japan.
Okay.
But so what happens is we're all in our room in the morning, like me and a bunch of friends, and the coaches come in, 3 coaches, and ordered basically everybody to get out. We knew someone was in trouble or something happened. We didn't really know what it was, but wanted me to stay. And I thought it had maybe something to do with some appearances or whatever would happen next for me as a gold medalist that morning, and potentially some cool opportunity. I don't know.
So you're excited.
Yeah, right. And right away they're like, so you tested positive for something in your drug test, but they haven't said what it is yet.
Do you know right away that it could be for weed?
instantly know it's weed because I don't have any other worry in my life other than testing positive for weed at the Olympics. That's like the thing I was thinking about for 4 years.
Okay, so now I've got to stop you here and call something out because I have a sponsor that I need to talk about in this part of your life. It's the second time I've had to talk about them, and I love them. It is Weedmaps. If you've heard of them, it's an amazing app in the States. I know everybody's got it. But they have a question of the day in my podcast, and it's great that you're on the podcast because you are a martyr for the fight for legal cannabis. So I'm going to have you on with this Weedmaps question, which is really going to be our Weedmaps conversation about how weed has impacted your life. But the question is how I'll start this is, the crazy thing with you and weed is you love weed, but you had to abstain because you were an Olympic athlete and you're going to be in the Olympics. And when did you quit smoking weed before the Olympics, and was that hard for you to do?
Well, I did a hard stop on cannabis in April, so spring of 97.
Okay.
So that was the end of the first year for me on the new ski tour that involved drug testing for the first time. On this tour, cannabis was on the list of banned substances on the World Cup tour. And we assumed it was for the Olympics as well. And so we went into the Olympics with that mindset. And it wasn't that hard, to be honest. It wasn't like my first choice to not smoke weed when I wake up in the morning.
But you're around it all the time with everybody that you see that aren't Olympians, which is most of your friends, I would think.
Yeah, like everybody I know where I was living at the time in Whistler, pretty much everyone I knew used cannabis on a regular. And I, over time, learned also how cannabis fit into my life. And, I like to have it in the morning with my coffee and,
Yeah.
That's just the way I like to operate. And so we never had to come across, like we were faced with not being able to find it in Europe or in the States and dealing with prohibition and laws and the risk that we were taking. But it had nothing to do with whether we thought it was good for us or not. We thought it was good for us. I thought it was good for me. And I was going to go with that. I was pretty in tune with what I was doing with myself at the time. And it seemed like cannabis was working.
So you do the hard stop, and that wasn't that hard for you to do.
No.
So that means you have plenty of time where you're not smoking weed, but you're around people that are doing it and you're in the room with it. And it is this secondhand smoke. And I think 10 years later, there's tests that validate that like the amount in your body was so minimal that it was stupid that anybody even talked about it. So it wasn't hard for you to quit smoking weed is what you're trying to say.
No, it wasn't at all. And it's like video games, more or less, like a mental addiction. Like you just want to play another game or whatever. Like, to be honest, I'm not a gamer. I used to be but I'm too busy. I've got a family. But anyway, weed's like that. It really is. And, I'm speaking for myself, but, everybody's different. Some people are allergic to peanut butter.
I'm with you 100%, Ross. I agree with everything that you're saying on it.
So that's how it was for me. And I was around older people that lived the same lifestyle as I did, that I looked up to, that were also successful in their lives and as parents and et cetera. And so the stigma for me in British Columbia growing up already was pretty low. I already surrounded myself around people who I looked up to that happened to use cannabis. It wasn't because they used it. They just happened to use it. And it was a common denominator in the people who I looked up to growing up, pro mountain bikers or, pro skiers or whoever.
It's part of the culture. I mean, you see it everywhere. Yeah. It's not even a big deal. So I'm going to say that part was our Weedmaps question right there. And now I've got to play a little Weedmaps ad.
Weedmaps is exactly what it sounds like. It's simply the place to go online when it comes to finding what you need, so you have absolutely nothing to worry about. The cannabis market can be a bit of a treasure hunt, but Weedmaps will get you straight to the source with no worries. Whether you're seeking out the best locations, deals, doctors, or strains, we offer online ordering and delivery where legal. No need to waste your precious time searching elsewhere. Go to weedmaps.com or download the free app today. It's your ultimate guide to cannabis. Weedmaps.
Download the app. It's your one-stop shop for everything cannabis-wise in the U.S. I don't know about Canada or anywhere else because I haven't looked into it that much because I'm not traveling that much anymore. But here's where I'm going with all of this. When the coaches let you know that you need to go down to the city for questioning, is your experience, are you treated like a full-on criminal?
I don't even know. I think some criminals can get in and out without anyone noticing.
Yeah, but like you're a famous criminal. What would happen if Slash were to get busted with drugs in Japan?
Yeah. No, literally, I had a recurring nightmare of this happening. Leading up to the games, I would wake up in a cold sweat and elevated heart rate, thinking I just tested positive or that I had forgotten I was going to be drug tested and then just had a bong rip or something. And so for it to all come true was really, devastating.
Do you think you're going to be locked up, like when you get in for questioning? Because do they think that you've brought weed into Japan and you've been taking it for performance-enhancing reasons or something? Is that what the Japanese are thinking?
What happened was that the drug testers brought my sample after I tested positive for weed to the cops outside of the IOC circle, independently reported me to the police. So I ended up in the police station in jail, or not in the jail, but in the police station jail by the end of the second day. And they were processing me for bringing a controlled substance into Japan in my body, in my urine sample.
So like your freedom is something that you're worried about, not just your Olympic medal or like disgracing a country or anything. You're just like, holy shit, I might go to jail for this.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
To add insult to injury, it's not even on the banned list of substances in the Olympics because it's not a performance-enhancing drug, I believe, at that point. The IOC president calls you a cheater. And when everything's all said and done, do you laugh in his face? Do you make a statement for yourself? Like, how are you able to save face, per se, and let people know that, like, this is all bullshit and this is totally wrong?
Right. So, like, after I got my medal back, Juan Antonio Samaranch called me out as a liar and said I made up a lie, which I didn't, because he was, I guess, referring to my secondhand smoke defense, because I don't know what else he would be referring to. But it was really kind of irrelevant because of the fact that they screwed up my life by taking my medal away for a substance and for one that wasn't on the list of banned substances. And they screwed up my life. And then he calls me a liar after that in front of the whole world after I legitimately got my medal back. And by the way, I'll say the only guy ever to get the medal back in the Olympics. No one's ever got the medal back.
Did they ever actually take it from you?
They never actually took it from me, but the Canadian Olympic Association confided in me after that they were supposed to have taken it from me.
Huh.
So it was technically taken away from me, but physically they didn't take it from me because maybe the look in my eye. I don't know, but I wasn't happy, to say the least.
Dude, you shouldn't be happy. Because this not only impacted you back then and like made your life a living hell, but I'm sure it's impacted you every day since then. Something it might remind you of the whole situation that happened. And I mean, this is coming from an American's perspective, but why not sue the shit out of the IOC and everyone else for making a joke about you and your sport?
Well, I definitely had that thought when I got back. And I think the reason why, and I did entertain the opportunity, or I guess you could say the opportunity or the prospect of doing that. And I believe that I was influenced not to do that and that it would be time consuming. And I was young, I was 26. But on top of that, I was at the time arguably one of the most popular people in Canada. I'd even just been on the Tonight Show with Jay Leno. I did the Tonight Show before I came home.
I heard that you got to stay at the Beverly Hills Hilton. I heard like the biggest highlight for you at that games would be after you got out of all your legal trouble, you walk into a cafeteria with all the other athletes and it's like you are the rock star amongst all the big athletes in the world. Like the Wayne Gretzky's of the world are like, that's Ross Rebagliati right there and he's killing it. Congrats, Ross. And that's how you like sign up with IMG and all that, is because you have star power among stars.
Exactly that. And on that note, when I walked into the offices of IMG in Toronto, they told me I was their biggest athlete since Tiger Woods. And there's a wild backstory with Nike as well that is noteworthy. Prior to the Olympics, I guess it was the fall of 97 leading into 98, I was on my way to Mount Hood and I have to drive by the Nike headquarters in Beaverton. And Nike was sponsoring the Canadian team, and I'd been to headquarters before, so I stopped in and I went in there and where Drake's video was shot. And I went and talked to the team manager and I said, look, I'm just on my way to Mount Hood to train and I just want to call the race in Nagano right now. For some reason, I tend to win like these big title races like the European Championships and the US Open and other big races. And I just thought it would be fun if I just laid it down. So anyway, I continued on to my training camp and, it was a wild season leading up to getting to Nagano. But those were the Nike guys that came with me in the van with the Transworld guy from the award ceremonies.
So you told those guys the year before the Olympics, hey guys, I'm going to win the Olympics.
They were there at the finish line and they couldn't believe it that happened. And within 24 hours, they disappeared after this whole thing.
Just to distance themselves from you.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's the thing is like, while there are some cool opportunities and a lot of things, it's not the time that it is now where there was a counterculture element to marijuana and maybe the way that you handled yourself too didn't all jive into working itself out to being a productive thing for you where it actually made life better for you. I mean, it seemed like this ruined your life to the point where you became a joke in a lot of the media world, not the days after, but the next years, like your earnings weren't what people thought they were going to be. And that's because people wanted to distance themselves away from cannabis. And at the same time, you decide not to compete anymore on your snowboard. Like 99, you're not snowboarding anymore, I don't think. And is it just like you need to get away?
Yeah, I actually started the tour in 99 and won the first race back and was DQ'd for apparently missing a gate, which to this day, I don't think I did. What happened, I came over a knoll and I was airborne as I went past the gate. And from their perspective, it looked like my board was in the air, but on the wrong side of the gate. Anyway, there was a whole slew of media at the race there for me about weed and not being a role model and drugs. At the time, weed was drugs.
Yeah.
And at the other races, same thing. And the other athletes were pressured by their sponsors and by their teams and by their countries that don't have the same cannabis culture as British Columbia. And it was just like, fuck, man. It was hard enough being ranked number one and everything going good with a duffel bag full of prize money.
Yeah.
To be away from my friends and family, let alone now. And so I called it and I went home like halfway through the season. And then shortly after that, I got on the no-fly list after 9/11. And I planned on taking like a year off after that because I'd been going at it steady since I was 15, so 12 years. And then I was going to go back into the X Games and the Border Cross. And then the 9/11, and I got on the no-fly list. And just my life was kind of at a point where I just was too tired to fight anymore.
You go from an Olympic gold medalist who should be living, I feel like, in like a mansion in Whistler and being the king of that town, but instead you're living in a van down by the river, I feel like literally in a van down by the river.
Oh, I was. I did actually live in my camper for 2 years. I bought a piece of property on the lake in Whistler, and this is a crazy story. And it had the zoning for me to do a lodge, like a boutique hotel. And so I flew the Roots guys around it in a helicopter, and I was living on it in my truck and camper, and I built a tiny house. And this was in like 2001, 2002. I was like the tiny house guy with the camper, living on the lake with an acre of property in Whistler, with Whistler and Blackcomb reflecting in the lake, with unreal. Okay. And we were going to do Ross's Roots Lodge. It was going to be sick, like 15,000 square feet lodge, basically, with 10 rooms.
Okay.
And it was going to be so awesome. And Whistler changed my zoning, so I couldn't do the lodge. And, it was just like one thing after another, like dominoes, like everything I tried to do. And then, because I sold the property after that, because it made me bankrupt, because I couldn't do my business plan. And don't forget, I'm not even 30 years old yet, and I've got this $1 million property trying to build a hotel under an immense amount of stress and PTSD from the Olympics, and just like beat down. And I went into like a number of years of basically,
just depression.
I bought a house in Whistler. I built a house in Whistler. And, I went through a couple of relationships. So one girlfriend took me to court, and then I ended up getting married and having a kid and getting divorced. And all this happening, before I even start up my Ross Gold company. And I think the final straw was when my daughter Rosie was born 8 years ago. We had packed up the car and we're going to go down to the States to visit my mom, who lives in Palm Springs, in the winter. And they turned us around at the border because of me. And I was so furious at the time, and this was 8 years ago, because we had planned the trip and we had to drive down from Whistler, and we already been on the road for a couple of hours with the baby, right?
Yeah.
Not an easy undertaking. And then we get turned around after a couple of hours of us being separated and interrogated. I was so mad and fed up by that point that's when I started Ross Gold. And that's really the catalyst where I felt like I had lost everything that I would have wanted to protect if I was going to start a cannabis company. And there's nothing now to stop me from really getting behind it, not just as a spokesperson for cannabis like I had already been doing, but putting my name on it this time and creating a brand.
Well, you had been doing it in a way that really hadn't been helping out your career at any point. Even Ross's Gold in the early days, it was still too early and the world wasn't ready for it. But now I think you have legacy brands, and now is when timing again, like how snowboarding lined up time-wise for you, weed is now lining up where you can be the face of Canadian weed. Like people have shunned you and have shit on you and have done so much shit because you got in trouble for something you shouldn't have gotten in trouble for at the Olympics. But now you've dealt with all that crap where I feel like it's your time to shine. Like you should own that Canadian weed industry. And I think you're on your way to it with your legacy brands and your Ross's Gold. And you've got a bunch of different things going on. Because I think there's a time in your life where you were like pounding nails and you were a carpenter and you actually had to work. Do you have to work now, or are you able to just live off of your brands and actually be a businessman?
Well, to be honest, we got huge brand traction, but I was not able as of yet to enter the market. We're talking about billion-dollar market caps with these companies that are here in Canada because we're a federally legalized business here in Canada. And it's like going up against, big pharma, literally. And so I've got the people on my side. My brand is the most recognizable brand right now in the cannabis industry. And we don't even have a website right now. But what's happening is finally, with the way the laws have changed, not only legalization, but since legalization, we are able to function how we're supposed to be able to function, where we can now have our own cannabis, we can have our own extracts and be part of that whole scene, because they put so many restrictions on what the companies are allowed to do and who's allowed to own them. And so I've been shut out of the industry, basically, and our launch is coming in 2021. And you mentioned legacy brand. Like I said, 8 years, we've 8 years in. You can't believe what we've gone through as a company, and legacy doesn't even exist anymore. That's gone now.
Okay.
There might even be people lining up to this story is not even beginning to end yet. So the Ross Gold brand was transitioned to another group who fell through on their obligation. In the transition period, I started Legacy. In the meantime, they fell through on their obligations on the Ross Gold brand, and I reacquired the brand. At the time, the huge recession in the cannabis industry and bad partners caused my Legacy brand to fail, basically, and to make a long story short. And in the meantime, was able to reacquire my Ross Gold brand from the defunct group that tried to buy the brand, but never did. And now I'm 1 year into repapering and Ross Gold 2.0, and we've got a new Ross Gold Nutrients deal coming out this year, fresh. I've got Todd Pearl from T-Dog Graphics doing the graphics, and T-Dog, he's like the pillar of packaging in the States. Like, he does all the good guys. And I've got Todd working on my stuff up here in Canada. Could be precedent setting for packaging up here. We're also working on LED lights by Alias, top of the line LED lights, Ross Gold lights.
Ross, you've got so much stuff going on. I feel like it's too much.
Yeah. So we've got the growing side, and we got the product, the cannabis, the extract, the shatter, the CBD. the topical creams, the edibles, the drinks, all that stuff, all coming online in 2021. And it's like you say, man, it's been a journey, not just in snowboarding, but since we started in the cannabis industry, we were up against serious players.
Well, I think you're timed right. And I feel like my only advice to you, and just the way that you've done things over your career, you are like the talent dude. And you don't need to be the business guy in this brand. You need to be the face, and you've put in the blood, sweat, and tears that have made you Ross's Gold, the first ever gold medalist snowboarder dude from Canada who had his whole life ruined by cannabis, but now he's here to save cannabis for all of Canada. And you hire some business guy to not even take your ideas, some proven business guy who's reputable to take your name, image, and make a whole lot of money off you and give you a cut of it. And you don't have to worry about all the bullshit, because it seems like the bullshit is what kind of makes you go crazy in life. But it's not going to make you go crazy in life is my next segment of my show. I call it Inappropriate Questions. This is how we're going to end this thing. And I get someone to record 3 questions, and they can be anything. And this week, I got someone who had a binding issue at the Olympics during his first run, Mark Fawcett. And I had Mark ask 3 questions, and I can't even remember what Mark's questions were, but I'm going to play you Inappropriate Question number 1 from Mark Fawcett right now.
Okay.
Ross, is it true while a young shredder at the Camp of Champions, you brandished a T-shirt that read, "I'd rather get effed up the butt than do drugs"?
Do you know the T-shirt he's referencing?
Yeah, I know which one he's talking about, and I didn't say that. It said something else. It said, "Be a board head, not a drug head." And I made a graphic. I was in high school at the time, like in grade 10. And he mentioned Camp of Champions, but they were beside us. I was at the Craig Kelly camp, and the Camp of Champions was right beside us. And yeah, I took flack for that. And, at the time I was 15. And my girlfriend in high school was, head of the Mothers Against Drunk Driving, right? And I was 15, and I'm just young. I haven't started living in Whistler yet. I'm from Vancouver. I don't know anything. All of a sudden, I'm in this camp, and I'm going to these contests with these older, kind of like heavy metal Iron Maiden guys, from the early 80s, like Led Zeppelin. Like these guys are wearing like Doors jean jackets at the half-pipe contest. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Smoking joints and shit. And I was allowed to go to these contests, without my parents. And, it was just like this counterculture, like I referred to. And it took me time to evolve as a teenager, 15. I didn't just start smoking weed the first time I saw someone smoking weed, right? I was like, oh, that's kind of wild. And I went through this whole relationship in high school, like with my girlfriend, multiple year relationship with my girlfriend. And so, yeah. At one point, I had a shirt that I stenciled with these cool skateboard designs and I still have the stencil, believe it or not, with spray paint. And I made this shirt with spray paint, and it said, "Be a board head, not a drug head."
All right. Well, that is question number 1. We are going to jump into question number 2.
Nearly all of us had relationships with fellow female competitors on tour. Did you have more North American or European girlfriends?
I would say it was even. I dated a couple of girls on my team that were from the States and one girl from Italy. Actually, one of my girlfriends was on the cover of Sonic Youth album.
Oh, no way.
Yeah, she's laying on the floor, kind of nude. And her name was Audrey. And she was really cool, actually. I really liked her a lot. And she ended up running out of money and had to leave the tour. And she was from New York City, but had to move to Vermont to get away from heroin, and ended up somehow on the World Cup tour with me. Anyways, I had a couple of girlfriends just like that I would see if I was, in one particular place in Austria. There was this one girl, Suzanne, who I saw a couple of years in a row. And yeah, it was really strange, like being isolated in Europe, pre-internet and pre-phone system too, like pre-cell phone. Made it a little bit weird. And I was really gone more than I was home. So I didn't really have girlfriends at home as much as I did sort of on the team, or maybe girls weren't really a huge part of my life, although I wanted them to be.
Right. All right. Well, we will go with the final inappropriate question.
For the final question, smoke it or eat it?
For weed,
Yeah.
I like to smoke it, but I love eating it. Like if I had my way, I would have edibles and be smoking weed. I'd probably be doing edibles all day long if I had them all the time.
I always find I get the edible hangover in the morning.
Yeah, I guess it depends like when at night you took them. If you took your last edibles at 12 or if you took your edibles at 6 o'clock at night instead of midnight. But I guess I've just succumbed to the fact that I'm better on cannabis than I am without cannabis. So whatever effects there may be lingering in the morning from cannabis, it's a better me.
Gotcha. Well, I want to thank you for your time, man. I mean, your story is an incredible one. I mean, the fact that you were riding half pipe at a top level and riding hard boots at that same level, and then you decided to go the way that some people might not think was the cooler way, but it was definitely the way to make sure that you knew that you were the best you could be because there was no judging and there was no, hey, I'm going to give this guy a score based on I like him. It was all based on your time. And your talent shone through. You made it to the Olympics. You won a gold medal, the first gold medal in snowboarding ever. And it almost seemed to be a curse, but it's like, while your life has been up and down, you're at this new era where cannabis is legal in Canada, although it seems like it's been legal forever, but it hasn't been. And I think you should be in a position to be able to capitalize on what you've built with your name. And I thank you for your time, man. It was great to talk to you.
Awesome, man. Well, I appreciate the opportunity. And yeah, man, super crazy ride.
So that was time with Ross Rebagliati, and man, what a story. And man, do I keep murdering his last name? I don't know. I don't know how to pronounce it, but Ross probably isn't going to care, nor call me back. I'm sure everyone destroys it. But with Ross, the hand he was dealt in life, it was an amazing thing. It gave him an Olympic gold medal and some bullshit to go along with it. The story can go two ways. You handle yourself right, and you take your shame, and you become a media darling, or you do what Ross did. Now, I'm not saying he handled everything wrong, because really, Ross got so screwed over. And when you look back on it, Ross came off as angry and almost sketchy to the public. He was no media darling. And when there were stories, they were bad. It was Ross suing a reality TV show in Whistler that he said stole his likeness, and while he won that, it still created publicity that was not positive. Then there was Ross in politics. He was running for office. And his background with weed and the controversy around that, well, that didn't help his case at all, and Ross lost that. But Ross is still here, and it is my belief that an Olympic gold medalist should be able to monetize that achievement, and now that weed is legal, hopefully Ross will be able to do the smart thing and remove himself from the business, except for the fun promotional side of things, and he should hire someone who knows what they are doing to create a weed empire. Speaking of weed empire, I'm not sure how this intro is coming off, but I ate a bunch of edibles last night, and like I said in the podcast, I have that weed hangover, so hopefully it's coming out smooth. And back to Ross. It's a bummer that Ross actually said that he's a carpenter by trade nowadays. That is crazy to me. As you know, I feel like he should be able to make money off of his metal, but those are my thoughts, and that was time with Ross Rebagliati. I highly recommend buying weed from him, and when you can, hopefully he will be on Weedmaps. That's the podcast for this week. At this point, I want to thank you for listening. I want to ask you to tell a friend about the show. And if you have no time right now, please review me when you do have time. If you have an iPhone, here is what you need to do. First, hit the podcast icon on your iPhone. Second, search for the Powell Movement. Third, click my logo. Fourth, scroll down to where you see the stars. Fifth, click 5 stars. And if you're feeling like going above and beyond, please write a review. I will definitely read it, and it will definitely make me feel better about myself. It only takes a minute, and it's greatly appreciated. Finally, please support my amazing sponsors who continue to support me. They are the 10 Barrel Brewery, Stanley, Peter Glenn Ski and Sports, Glade Optics, Elan Skis, and Weedmaps. Have a great week, everyone.